Okay, great. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining our session, Resilient Water Systems in the Face of a Changing Climate. My name is Jennifer Brunton, and I currently serve as the chair of the Water and Wastewater Committee for the New Jersey American Council of Engineering Companies, that's ACEC, as well as I serve as WSP's New York Water Business Line Lead. I've dedicated my 20-plus year career to protecting communities from flooding and fusing green into gray infrastructure and restoring habitats. We will be introducing our panelists shortly, but we would love to know who you are. So please introduce yourself in the chat. And to give you an overview of what's ahead, the session consists of 3 parts. First, we will highlight examples of Hurricane Ida's damaging impact on drinking water, wastewater. We'll be learning from utilities that have been proactive with measurements to increase climate resilience. We will follow this by a case study of a framework to help water utilities assess climate risk and opportunity. And finally, we will end with a discussion geared towards recommendations for New Jersey utilities and municipalities. Throughout the session, please share your comments and questions for the panelists through either the chat or there's a Q&A function. And just a note, towards the end of the session, there will be a Jersey Water Check scavenger hunt game question posted in the chat. Jersey Water Check is a data dashboard with information of over 500 utilities in New Jersey. The scavenger hunt's goal is to help participants become familiarized with the dashboard. The first 3 that have all correct responses will get a $25 gift certificate to Starbucks. So be on the lookout for that question towards the end of the session. Additionally, there'll be a link in the chat for a sign-on letter opportunity regarding the allocation of American Rescue Plan Act funds for water infrastructure investments. All right, let's jump in. So today we are joined by a remarkable panel of experts, and I will turn it over to them to introduce themselves and hear what perspective they'll be bringing to the panel today. So Hector, let's start with you. Are you there?
Yes, I am. I'm sorry. Hello.
You're good.
Hello, everybody. My name is Hector Herrera. I am the Borough Administrator for the Borough of Pembroke here in Somerset County, New Jersey.
Great, thanks. Jim?
Thanks, Jen. I'm Jim Cosgrove. I'm Vice President and Principal of Kleinfelder. I'm also the Princeton Office Operations Manager. I'm a licensed professional engineer in New Jersey. And for the last 35 years, I've served as an environmental consultant focused on water, wastewater, and stormwater issues in New Jersey. Unfortunately, I have numerous utility clients that I'm going to be talking to you about today who are impacted by the remnants of Hurricane Ida with pretty catastrophic results.
Great. Looking forward to hearing that. Scott, how about you?
Thanks, Jen. My name is Scott Schreiber. I'm the Executive Director of the Camden County Municipal Utilities Authority, which serves as the regional wastewater provider to Camden County. Unlike some of my colleagues on this panel, the CCMUA has been lucky in that it's avoided the worst effects of Ida and Superstorm Sandy. And so we've really been trying to learn from those lessons and plan for the future in our work. And so I'd like to talk about that today.
Excellent. Oleg?
Hi, my name is Oleg Kostin, Director of Operations for New Jersey American Water, and today we're going to be talking about our 20-year journey to resiliency, at least resiliency with respect to how we made our way through Ida. It was a long journey, but we took steps along the way over 20 years, and it culminated in our facility being protected by all the investments that we made along the way.
Excellent. And Rick?
Hey, good morning. My name is Rick Dovey. I'm the president of the Atlantic County Utilities Authority, ACUA. We serve the populated portion of Atlantic County with a regional wastewater treatment system. We're located in Atlantic City behind the Absecon Island. Though not affected by Ida, we've been certainly affected by Hurricane Sandy and any number of other major storms over the last 30 years. So our experience, unfortunately, has been difficult other times.
Okay. And Alua?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alua Selimanova. I'm a sustainability, energy, and climate change project consultant with WSP based out of San Francisco. I work a lot with public and private sector clients, helping them to better understand their climate risks and opportunities and align with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And today I'm going to talk about the project that my team at WSP led with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission over the course of last year.
Excellent. Okay, so we will jump right in. The first part of the session is we're going to talk about the impacts of Ida on water utility operations. And my first question goes to Hector. Can you talk to us a little bit about how Hurricane Ida impacted the water systems in Bound Brook? Uh-oh, it's Hector not there.
He's having technical difficulties, so.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Yeah, let's go over to you, Jim. How about you? Can you talk to us about what some of your utility sector clients faced during the remnants of Ida?
Yes, absolutely. If you could advance the slide a couple, I think you'll get to my PowerPoint. Keep going past there. One more. Okay. So let's think about what happens when we have floods in New Jersey. What are people seeing on the news? What I've noticed recently is they're seeing things like what you see in these pictures. They've got the focus on homes being flooded, roads being flooded and closed, power lines down, things like that. What we often don't see is the impact on the water industry. You go to the next slide. So what's happening behind the scenes at our water and wastewater utilities? Well, the first thing that we see, and we certainly saw a few weeks ago with the remnants of Hurricane Ida, is that the wastewater pump stations are being flooded. When those pump stations are flooded, we can't get the wastewater to the treatment plants to be treated. Then downstream from those pump stations, we're getting water and wastewater treatment plants flooded themselves. When the flooding occurs at those locations, treatment processes get impacted and sometimes get shut down. We end up with partially treated or completely untreated wastewater discharged to receiving streams. We also have source water issues because if the wastewater treatment plants are discharging poorly treated wastewater, you end up contaminating the receiving streams, the rivers that we're pulling our drinking water out of. And so the potable water treatment facilities have to treat to a greater level to provide clean water to their customers. Go ahead to the next slide. So here's a picture, and you can't appreciate this because you don't know what these tanks look like, but the circles you see there, this is the Somerset Raritan Valley Sewage Authority on September 2nd. There are 10-foot tall tanks there that are totally underwater. Those round rings you see are the tops of the tanks. So there's more than 10 feet of water there. These are the highest flood elevations that were ever recorded at this facility. This facility's been flooded out in the past, but never to this level for what they saw with Hurricane Ida. And this is a very substantial treatment plant. 23 million gallons a day on average is treated. And during this time, it was more like 70 million gallons per day being treated. So their effluent, the treatment plant obviously was severely impacted. Effluent quality was reduced. There's a tremendous risk to the operators of these facilities when this happens. I mean, I had one guy telling me he was standing in ponded water and suddenly felt an electrical charge going through his entire body because some of the pump motors were submerged and it was electrifying the water. And in this case, hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage to the facility. If you go to the next slide. This is the Stony Brook Regional Sewage Authority. I've tried to give you examples of all different size treatment plants. This is their Pennington wastewater treatment plant. This is only a 500,000 gallons per day treatment plant, but this plant also was flooded to historic levels. In fact, this plant had rarely seen flooding in the past, and it got wiped out by the remnants of Hurricane Ida. You can see here, this is actually when the water level dropped in this picture. The water was being pumped out. This is a second floor pump station. So, there was certainly more than 10 feet of water ponded. Not only did the pump motors get ruined, but you can see there's a chemical feed storage tank laying on its side. They had things like that happen where storage tanks, were toppled as a result of the floodwaters. And here again, effluent quality was impacted because so much damage occurred to the treatment plant. Next slide, please. One thing we don't think about is, you think about the motors and the pump stations and things that went underwater. But here's a situation where a file storage room was flooded with many, many feet of water, shelves tipped over, and years, decades of files were totally ruined as a result of the flood. Next slide. This is the Montgomery Township Stage 2 plant. The thing that was really disappointing here is where you see that fence partially submerged with floodwaters. You can also see a dumpster almost completely submerged. We have designed, on behalf of Montgomery Township, we've designed a flood wall as a resiliency project to keep this treatment plant from being flooded. But unfortunately, it took 19 months for us to get land use permits out of New Jersey DEP so that we could construct that flood wall. So we could have had this facility protected from this storm, but unfortunately, because the permitting took so long, we haven't been able to build that flood wall. So something I think we need to think about and discuss today even is a way for regulatory agencies and the regulated community to work together better to be able to fast track some of these resiliency projects. Next slide. Here's the Madison-Chatham Joint Meeting wastewater treatment plant on September 2nd. Here again, similar flooding in pump rooms on the left. On the right, you can see a computer totally immersed in water. Certainly not the way to operate a computer under 2 feet of water. So they had severe electric equipment damage. You can see in the upper side of the left picture, there is water flowing out of an electrical box in the ceiling. That is really not the best way to operate your electric equipment. So they had severe electrical system damage and severe electronic and computer system damage, which also impacted the process. Next slide. Here's the same treatment plant. As I say in the caption here, this isn't snow. This is foam as a result of the treatment process being upset. Crazy things happen when treatment plants get impacted from flooding. The biology gets impacted. And when that happens, things like this happen. And unfortunately, it sometimes takes weeks to get a biological system back in operation. So anything we can do to avoid this happening in the first place saves an incredible effort down the road. Next slide. So just some thoughts for the future. Given the climate changes that we're experiencing and the substantially increased flooding we're seeing in New Jersey, a few things I would recommend. First of all, we need to update our tools to predict flooding elevations better. What we saw in Hurricane Ida in some cases were flooding elevations greater than the 500-year storm. So we definitely need to predict that well. We need to incorporate resiliency planning into new designs and our existing facilities. Sometimes after facilities are built, people think, well, that's just the way it has to be. We can incorporate resiliency into our existing facilities. We need to improve collaboration between the utilities and the regulators like DEP to fast track permits for resiliency projects. A permit for a flood wall should not take as long as a permit to build a 1,000-unit subdivision. They have to be treated differently. And some resiliency planning is better than none. Sometimes people think it's going to cost millions and millions of dollars to be able to protect from what happened in Hurricane Ida. That's true, but it may be that for 100 times less, you could protect from the 25-year storm, and that's worthwhile. So you need to start somewhere. So look at what low-hanging fruit you have to protect, and that may be for less expensive. So I will stop there, and I hope we have time at the end for some questions and discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would be great if we could walk out of this with, delineating more of those action items into next steps. Thank you so much. Hector, I think you are back. So can you talk to us about how Hurricane Ida impacted the water systems in Bound Brook?
Yes. Hi. Hello, everybody. And I apologize about the technical difficulties before, but I'm back. So yes, and if you want to get that video going, so I think everybody had heard about some of the issues that we'd had in Bound Brook. Namely the train getting stuck on the Jersey Transit train getting stuck. And what I really kind of more wanted to talk about today was the failure of the Greenbrook pump station, which is owned by the Middlesex County Utilities Authority, which is a little bit down, not quite a mile down on the Raritan River. So what you're seeing now is an area that is right at Main Street going into South Main Street. That's the Meridia building, high density. And all of that water that you see there is actually from the backup from that pumping station. That area and that pumping station actually takes on two different systems. One, and we'll see it in a little bit. This is one that in this area comes from the borough itself and goes to eventually to the Middlesex County Utilities Authority and the MCUA plant. But also very close to here, and you'll see here in a moment, there is a Plainfield Area Regional Sewage Authority, PARSA. There is also a 60-inch main that goes through the borough in one of our parks, and I'll show you. You'll see that here in a moment. So just kind of backing up a little bit, we had been obviously this was going to be really the first big major storm that was going to occur since the completion of the flood control project. So, on our end, we're like, well, this is it. This is the test. This is what these millions upon millions of dollars and really, almost 50 years of planning had come to. It was this moment. And really, we were so focused on that, the communication both ways with the MCUA didn't happen. So in the middle of that night, right in that area that we were you were seeing, somewhere around a little after 4 in the morning, it starts to back up, and that smell. We all know that smell. Like this is, this isn't from the river. This isn't from the gates failing. This is sewage. Evacuated the Meridia, and what have you. The next day, and if you'll see, that's the park that I'm showing you, and you can't quite see because this is after. but the next day, after daylight, basically it looked like a geyser there. So like, what in the world is going on here? Again, our focus was so much on the gates. We hadn't even really thought about this. Only to confirm later on with the MCUA that yes, they had to abandon that pump station because of the I guess it was underwater. Again, it's right on the banks of the Raritan, and that was the issue, right? And eventually, Parsa came. They cleaned up the park. The MCUA has stated they're going to invest a lot of funds into improving that pump station in hopes of something like this not happening. But really, what I wanted to focus on as the borough administrator here in Bound Brook was the communication aspect of it. In the days immediately following, we got on the phone with them being actually both entities, Parsa and the MCUA, and we both agreed that there was a need for improved communication. In the days after, they identified and shared with us some of the improvements that they will be making, and of course, Parsa, every step of the way of cleaning the pump station, cleaning the park area, they were in contact with us. But it's really important for me and really for everyone to be able to have that open line of communication with our partners. Especially when a big event like this is going to happen, and certainly identifying where your potential problem areas are. I will tell you, and I think that this now becomes, a failure, but then a success story, as is evident in that the late October storm. Couldn't get enough every step of the way, from the early forecasts, we were getting, I was certainly getting messages from the MCUA, making sure that they were contacting me, they were contacting my DPW superintendent, and certainly I think that moving forward, I would expect that is kind of the communication that we're going to see, and we had that communication during Ida. I don't know that things would have been different. I think we would have been a little more prepared. So I guess just to sum it up, communication is really the key for me as the borough administrator, being able to get the message out to our residents.
Great, excellent. Thank you so much, Hector. Those are really compelling images. And I like that, it's not just accepting, what are we going to do? What are the action items, both you and Jim? What are we doing to move forward? And that pivots us to this next part of, where are the proofs that these hardening investments are valuable? So Scott, this next question is for you. Could you talk to us a little bit about how CCMUA thinks about and prepares for climate change?
Sure, Jen. Thank you very much. And really, what we're aiming to accomplish here is to not have the impact that Hector had to deal with. So from our downstream communities here in Camden County, our goal, first and foremost, is to make sure that we're pumping and getting the flow out of the communities and into our wastewater treatment plant. So I'll just touch briefly on who we are. The Camden County MUA operates an 80 million gallon per day wastewater treatment plant in Camden. We serve the 510,000 residents of Camden County. We're hydraulically connected to Camden and Gloucester cities, which have a combined sewer systems. So on wet weather days, we can see flows up to 185 million gallons per day. The way we're really looking at climate change is in three broad kind of buckets. One is reliable and fossil fuel-free energy. 2 is planning for increased amounts of precipitation, and 3 is planning for river rise. And so I'll go through in the next few slides, I'll go through some examples of the authority's work. Next slide, please. First, I'd like to talk about the power resiliency component of what we're trying to accomplish. And for us, and especially in the light of climate change, power comes down to two main factors. To a few main factors. Ensuring it is available to us at all times, even during large storm events or grid failure, that's paramount. And then to the very best of our ability, utilizing non-fossil fuel energy as much as possible. To that end, we have spent about $75 million over the past 5 years to construct a sludge digestion and combined heat and power facility. The anaerobic digester reduces the sludge volume by about 50%, and produces enough biogas to produce about 1.9 megawatts of electricity, or about 50% of the authority's dry weather energy needs. And when we couple that with our solar power array, the CCMUA is producing about 60% of its energy needs on site in a non-fossil fuel way. The combined heat and power system can also burn natural gas up to a point of producing 100% of the authority's needs. So in order to take advantage of the ability to run completely free of the grid, the authority also owns a black start generator, meaning that at any time the wastewater treatment plant can go into island mode and continue to pump flows into the plant. So a high level takeaway is that the authority is working really hard to reduce its carbon footprint while also ensuring that it can continue to run even during a natural disaster. Next slide, please. I'll only touch on this briefly, but we've also taken steps to increase our wet weather capacity to 185 million gallons per day. So at the same time, and kudos to our operations and maintenance staff who operated a wastewater treatment plant while doing all of these projects. It was really something to see. But at the same time we were completing the digester and the combined heat and power system, we were also expanding the capacity by 35 million gallons per day, which means that in times of increased precipitation, we can take more combined sewage from the CSO communities. Next slide, please. So while the next, I'll talk about a little bit about precipitation and flooding. And so while, as I've just talked about, we've taken strides to take more flow into the plant, we can't convey and treat everything from the Camden combined sewer system. And so, which means we have to really start planning and designing projects in Camden to reduce flooding and overflow. And while we have 3 projects in design for Camden City that are aimed at handling increased precipitation events, which caused this flooding, I'm just going to highlight one now. Specifically something called the Pennsauken disconnect. There's a historical and for the regulators out there, very permitted interconnection between Pennsauken Township and Camden City, which significantly contributes to flooding and overflows in the Kramer Hill neighborhood of Camden. The design is to eliminate the interconnection, separate the area of Pennsauken that is contributing these flows into Camden, get the sanitary flow to the wastewater treatment plant, and the stormwater conveyed to the Delaware River via a stormwater pumping station. And the climate change piece is this. For today's needs, the stormwater pumping station needs to push out about 60 million gallons per day. However, with models and experts predicting up to a 25% increase in precipitation, the CCMUA is sizing the pump station and the force main to be able to handle up to 120 million gallons per day of stormwater. The idea is to build the infrastructure now for an increased need that we know is coming. So the building will have a larger wet well than is needed for today's conditions, a larger force main, and room to add more pumps and emergency generators. So as the need to push more flow arises, we will not need to go through a major construction project to accommodate it. Next slide, please. And I'll run through this briefly. But the last thing that we're doing, and this is really at a planning level, is working with Drexel University and putting together a comprehensive model for Camden City, which will allow the authority to focus on where river rise, which is predicted to be as much as 36 inches in the Delaware River by mid-century, where the river rise increase and precipitation and flooding will impact vulnerable populations. And by trying to understand the future conditions now with the model, we'll be able to better locate and plan anti-flooding projects in the city during our long-term control plan implementation. So these are a few ways that the authority is working forward to try to counteract climate change. Thanks, Jen.
Amazing. Great. Thank you so much. It's an array of investments. Now let's go over to Oleg. Could you talk to us about American Water, New Jersey American Water, what they've done to prepare its facilities for impacts of events like Ida?
Sure. The previous presentations have really underscored, what happens during a major flood. And unfortunately for American Water, our story actually goes across 20 years time frame. The first major issue that we ever had was Hurricane Floyd. Could you advance the slide, please? So a little bit about the facility that we're going to be talking about today. It's the Raritan Millstone Water Treatment Plant, and it works in our central operating area and services a population of over 1 million people through either direct customers or other townships served. We also have critical regional interconnections with Newark, Passaic Valley Water Commission, and the City of Trenton. On a regular basis, this facility produces 35 billion gallons of water a year and an average production capacity of almost 100 million gallons on a daily basis. This particular facility, if it goes down, has no other alternative supply options for the system. Next slide, please. So as I alluded to earlier, our first experience with flooding was in 1999 during Hurricane Floyd. I'd been working for the company at that point in time for a little over 4 years. And, this was the first time since 1973 that there was ever, a serious impact from a flood. The first impact was Hurricane Doria back in 1973, but it was minor in comparison to what happened during Hurricane Floyd. We had low system pressure because the plant went down. It was compromised. It was compromised with respect to fire protection. We were on a boil water alert for 10 days. We closed down businesses. Schools were closed, and manufacturing was suspended for a significant amount of time, impacting the local economy. So next slide, please. So in the aftermath of Hurricane Floyd, when the Raritan Millstone plant went down, there was a sister facility just across the way from the Raritan Millstone plant called the Canal Road Water Treatment Plant, and it went online in 1995. It was rated at 40 MGD, but during Hurricane Floyd, when the Raritan Millstone plant went down, it actually produced 75 million gallons of water, really over producing what it was designed to do. Fortunately, it held up very well, and it produced a high quality effluent, which really saved the day with respect to maintaining system pressure and not having negative impacts with respect to backflows. So after Floyd, we went and we decided to upgrade and re-rate the plant, and that happened twice. The first step was going from 40 to 60 MGD, and then from 60 to 80 MGD, and the facility can now peak at 100 million gallons per day. When the Raritan Millstone plant went down, it took us 4 days to start to come back online, and systematically over the next couple of days, at day 6, we were able to get to average daily production between the Canal Road plant and what we were able to bring back online during at the Raritan Millstone plant. Physical damage that occurred during that particular storm was well over $18 million, and because of the impact to the communities and the financial impact on the plant itself, immediately the company undertook the funding, design, and permitting and construction of a flood wall to the 100-year flood elevation. This was done within a year. That flood wall was in service in time for the peak 2000 hurricane season. So it moved quickly, and New Jersey DEP helped move that along quickly, but only to a 100-year flood elevation event. So next slide, please. So here's a history of the highest river crests just downstream of the Raritan Millstone plant. And as you can see, the majority of these storms have all hit within the past 20 years. And this is what we're facing. The two biggest storms are Hurricane Floyd and Hurricane Ida. They look equivalent here, but I can tell you based on river elevation gauges at the plant that Hurricane Ida was significantly worse with respect to the flooding issues. Next slide, please. So the next big test we had was Hurricane Irene back in 2011. With the new flood wall in place, the facility survived very well. It was the second highest peak compared to Hurricane Floyd at the time, and the facility survived very well. Next slide, please. But just barely. I call this shot the money shot. This is a picture of the flood wall or the flood elevation in comparison to the top of the flood wall. And as you can see, we were an inch away from disaster. So, I call this the money shot because, when I presented this to the company leadership, again, we undertook immediate planning for expansion or raising of this wall. Next slide, please. So, as I said, the wall that we constructed after Floyd, withstood Hurricane Irene, but just barely. So the company immediately undertook, again, funding, design, permitting, construction to raise the flood wall elevation. And we did a cost-benefit analysis to come up with an elevation that was reasonable and cost-effective. And what we came up with was the 500-year flood elevation. So the flood wall was raised to elevation 48. Previous elevation was elevation 44, so we went up 4 feet. And this construction again was completed in time for the 2018 peak hurricane season. The final cost of the project was $32.4 million. And concurrently with this project, we also undertook an emergency power upgrade, which cost about $17 million and was put into service in mid-2020. Next slide, please. And this leads us to, this video that I'm going to show you. This is drone video at the peak of Hurricane Ida, and you'll see just how successful this particular project was. So you can start at any time. So this is the front of the plant. And you can see the flood walls surrounding the facility. And you can see on the inboard side of the flood wall, it's high and dry. No issues whatsoever. The plant continued to operate and everything was fine. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see 3 what look like trailers. Those are 3 2.5 megawatt generators that was part of the what I described previously to give us backup power capability, that would be uninterruptible. Obviously, you can see the floodwaters surrounding on the outboard side of the flood walls. Everything on the inside of the plant is nice and dry and green. The water is, after it's been treated, is pristine. And it's interesting. Hector and Jim Cosgrove referred to, their incidents. This facility is actually just upstream of Bound Brook, upstream of Hector's town. And, we're actually going to, as it tilts up, we're looking at Bound Brook right here towards Bound Brook. So you can see how devastating it was. Had that flood wall not been there, there would have been well in excess of $32 million worth of damage, not to mention the disruption to the local economy and to the populace. And that's all I have to in my presentation.
Unbelievable. Thank you so much, Oleg. So, important point from Oleg as well as from Scott, we're not designing, when we're thinking about resiliency, we're not designing to a specific storm, right? We're not saying we're going to protect from a future Ida or Floyd. These are, there's going to be additional storms in the future. We know that the water levels, the rainfall levels are going to rise, and we also have to protect against coastal surges. And so now we're going to move over to Atlantic County. And Rick, the question for you is, what is your authority doing to prepare for climate change impacts?
Well, we have a different problem than the previous speakers because we're located on the coast immediately in the Back Bay. So I remember fretting about Floyd, but it luckily for us went up the Delaware Valley or the interior of New Jersey and not along the coast. But every storm season is a bit scary. And the impacts of the sort of severe weather we've had in the last 10 or 15 years is significant. So I'm going to sort of deviate before I get into my presentation here for a second. We had a very strange wind event called a derecho about 6 years ago here in southern New Jersey, and it didn't affect other parts of the state. But it caused the power to be out in this part of the state for a week, which of course impacts pump stations, sewage pump stations. And I think we've all learned about the vulnerability of pump stations. And it's not something that everybody focuses on. But anyway, let me start. Next slide, please. So there's the Atlantic County Utilities Authority wastewater plant in normal conditions. It's an island right behind Atlantic City. It's actually immediately adjacent to the Forsyth National Wildlife Refuge. It's the site of the previous Atlantic City sewer plant, and this regional system came online in 1978 and been operational. So next slide, please. This is the service area that all the wastewater in the blue area, 14 municipalities are members, constituent municipalities, and that feed their wastewater to the ACUA for treatment. We have a regional collection system, some 20 major regional pump stations, bringing the untreated wastewater to our plant for treatment. Next slide. Here's a money shot, I guess, similar to what Scott or Oleg was talking about. This is not Hurricane Sandy. This is a storm, again, not even named. In 1992, we called it the Halloween storm. It was a nor'easter. But you can see how close the plant treatment processes in the aeration basins and treatment facilities were nearly compromised. This was, I would say, our first wake-up call, and it's made us really get focused on the increased flooding that's happening on the Back Bays. Next slide. That's another shot from that storm. Next slide. So after Hurricane Sandy, where we literally did come within a couple inches, similar to Oleg's experience recently, of the treatment process being compromised. We have a plant that's 30 million gallon a day normal treatment. It goes up in extreme weather, storm events and flooding events to 80 million gallons a day. Mainly by infiltration through cracks in the municipal systems. That happens a couple times a year, depending on the storm. We decided that the real answer for our plan was the seawall project, similar to what was just described by the American Water did at their water treatment plant. So we applied through the DEP Wastewater Trust for funding, and $3.7 million. Similar to what Jim mentioned, it was a long permitting process of at least 2 years. Luckily, during those 2 years, we did not face any extreme events, flooding events. But it's been done for about 2 years. Top of the wall is 11 feet above sea level. We're pretty sure that that gives us significant protection for most of what can be anticipated in the coming years. Next slide. Okay, so the yellow shows the outline of the seawall that has surrounded the entire plant site. Where you don't see yellow line and the seawall was not built, those parts of the island are high enough to achieve protection of 11 feet. At the road, we have a special barrier that would be installed to protect that opening during a storm event. Next slide. This is a shot of the construction of the seawall project. Next. Another shot. It's a bit challenging to install this. And of course, the permitting process, as I mentioned before, was pretty extensive and took a while. Next shot. There's the seawall, not totally installed in caps, but it's adjacent to the major connection to the local power grid, Atlantic City Electric, that's their property and or their responsibility. But you can see how vulnerable the power and system is to flooding. Next. Again, another shot. That's the equalization basin. That's where the treated effluent is stored before it's pumped. The effluent is treated and pumped to the ocean for discharge. Next shot. Another shot of the seawall in the plant. Next. So pump stations, as it was described by Jim and Scott, they're really critical. And again, most people don't even know what those buildings are. So most of our pump stations that we operate, 20 some of them throughout the county, are located in low-lying areas immediately adjacent to streams or the bay. They're subject to flooding almost on a regular basis in extreme weather events, flooding, storms, ocean northeasters, and so forth. So we have couldn't really see that we should do a seawall around each one of those. But what we have is purchased through the trust a series of inflatable barriers that we can deploy when we know a major event is to our most vulnerable stations. And we know by experience where those are. Next shot, please. And those are the portable barriers. We have practiced deploying them. We have not had an event where we had to deploy them yet. So once a year they get exercised and our staff gets trained and prepared to install them. Next shot. Okay, this is one of those training events where we're doing this at the wastewater plant, not actually at a pump station. Next. Okay, so the other point that has been made is how important our power resiliency is. And we also, through the New Jersey Environmental Trust, did upgrade our backup power at the wastewater plant severely. I would say that was our major impact during Hurricane Sandy. The power company could not provide us with power. And the irony for us is as most people know, we have a wind farm on our plant, provides 60% of our power. During a weather event like that, they must disconnect from operations to protect the grid, actually. And we also have a solar project that provides another 4% of our power. So those are not, we're not able to island that renewable energy. And so we were totally relying on backup power. At the time, 40-year-old diesel generators. We've totally replaced those with new diesel generators. And we're continue to explore the ability for us to be an island a power source of our own, utilizing the renewable energy on site. Those it's a fairly difficult process through the BPU and other processes, but we're hopeful that in the next few years we'll be able to do that. I look forward to answering any questions or as we get later in the program. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rick. So we've heard a lot of resiliency takes forms in multiple buckets, right? Like Rick said, it's not just the flooding from rainwater, coastal surges. It's also energy, wind, our carbon footprint. So now we're going to pivot over to, how do we prioritize those investments? So Alua, the question is for you. You've worked with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission to help them pilot test a framework for assessing their climate risks and opportunities through a desktop exercise. So how did these tabletop exercises help the utility better understand its preparedness to climate change impacts, and what are some of the lessons learned that could be applicable to New Jersey utilities?
Lou, I think you're muted.
Oh, there you are. Oops. Can anyone? Okay, sorry. I think I was muted. Alua, are you there now? Okay, so why don't we go around the room and before we'll come back to Alua and see if
Actually,
we can go around.
Sorry.
Oh.
I have her on my phone, so just speak through my audio if that's all right.
Oh, yeah, that works.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. So is my, okay, can you just confirm that?
Yep.
We can hear you
Yeah,
fine
okay,
now.
great. Sorry about that. Accommodating me. The goal of this project was really to Public Utilities Commission, SFPUC, to map key climate-related risks and opportunities to their mission-critical business functions. Why the SFPUC was interested to pilot test this approach is because one of the largest utilities serving 2.7 million residential and commercial customers in the Bay Area, the utility has already built a lot of foundational understanding of some of their key risks from climate change. They've done a lot of comprehensive modeling, especially exploring around the sea level rise impacts and vulnerability assessment. But what is mainstreaming some of the climate considerations across business functions, especially those that are not thinking of climate change as part of their day-to-day job, such as HR, operations, finance, health and safety, watershed management. And so the goal of this project was really to these functions could be impacted by future climate-related risks, and also how they're existing underlying conditions and vulnerabilities could be exacerbated by future climate impacts. So this is just a bit of a context on the project. If we can move on. Next slide. So as I said, my team at in San Francisco worked with this FPC, but some other colleagues from WSP did a similar testing, engaging Denver Water, a water utility in Colorado, and some other project partners whom I just want to acknowledge, the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies and the Water Utility Business Risk and WUCA Alliance. And so without them, this project won't be possible. We can move to next slide, please. Part of our approach is really taking a tabletop exercise approach that is not commonly used among utilities to talk about climate-related risks. The tabletop exercise approach really stems out of military and Department of Defense war gaming type of exercises, and only recently this approach started being to address some other key risks, including those related to climate. And as the name suggests, usually it implies that people would be gathering in a conference room, for example, or on the table. They can really have an open discussion about some of the complex and systemic risks. But because when we started working on this project, we were really in deep lockdown here in the Bay Area, we did our tabletop exercise completely virtually over a course of 3 days. But we still managed to get a very good presence of participants and very good engagement, although each session lasted between 4 and 6 hours a day, roughly, and the exercise cycle involved. We designed and developed the exercise. We conducted it, we evaluated the outcomes through feedback sessions with participants and the survey forms that were sent after the exercise itself. And we also developed a list of recommended next steps and practical solutions that the SFPUC could take internally and start mainstreaming some of the climate-related decisions across business functions. Next slide, please. So this is the framework that we developed as a result of the tabletop exercise. And so the way to read this graph is basically there are 2 parts. The first one, steps 1, 2, and 3. And these steps, SFPUC or any other utility that is piloting this approach should take before conducting the exercise itself. And the last 3 steps are conducted as part of the exercise. There are 2 ways to conduct this approach. So first would be more basic. So if you're a smaller utility, or if you're not at the stage when you're ready to engage multiple stakeholders, if you're still in the process of building some of this foundational understanding of your key climate risks, then you can just focus on steps highlighted in gray. And instead of a comprehensive tabletop exercise, you can just conduct a workshop for a lighter version of it. There's the blue steps. It's something that we added to this framework to make it more advanced for larger utilities that are already at the stage of discussing climate-related risk at the enterprise level and really mainstreaming it. So in the case of this FPUC, first step that they took was to really get internal buy-in from their senior leadership to create a business case and articulate the value of conducting this assessment, to identify resources, set a timeline, budget, but come up with the key objectives that are specific to the needs of the FPUC, given their midterm and long-term business development strategy. Step 2 focused on creating a focus for the assessment by identifying 3 key business functions that are already seeing impacts of climate change, and we're ready basically to become internal champions after this exercise and help to mainstream it. And so those 3 business functions in the step of this framework to co-developing some of the future scenario narratives that we used in the exercise. We talked about the time horizons, what the organization would like in 20 years from now or 40 years from now. What are some of the key risks that they might be facing under current conditions or under a more, for example, higher greenhouse gas emission scenario. And in addition to the scenarios, we also developed some of the pre-read materials and playbooks that became available to all participants ahead of time. During the exercise itself, we went through steps 4, 5, and 6 to first talk about some of the underlying conditions that the organization is facing now, not only in relation to climate change, but broader than that. What's the situation of their aging infrastructure, for example, or talent retention, or ability of workers to work outdoor, for example, after a major fire or during extreme weather. Some of these risks are being addressed by SFPUC, and this discussion led us to talking about some of the key risks that they're already facing, that they might be facing in the future, again, at midterm and in the long run, and what are some of the opportunities, especially as they relate to mitigation and adaptation measures that are already being taken either at the enterprise level or at the business function level, and what are some of the more innovative solutions that the SFPUC can come up with to address some of the more uncertain risks, the magnitude and the level of which might still not be fully understood. So if we can move to the next slide. Yeah, I think we can just skip this. Yeah, so on this slide, I just wanted to summarize some of the future scenario narratives that we used to set the scene for participants, and we framed it in a way that imagine that it's already 2040. We're already seeing some of the climate-related impact emission scenario, so RCP 8.5, as developed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. What would your future risks look like, and how your business functioned, depending if you're doing business services or watershed management or capital project planning, how you might be exposed to these risks under these conditions, what this risk would look like in 2070. And although it's of course hard for participants to imagine, right, when you're talking about a timeline that far into the future, it still helps them to think outside of the box and think of the implementing right now, something that would be worth investing in a few years from now, knowing that many of these risks could be happening at a much larger scale, and the current conditions could be exacerbated even more. And so on the right-hand side, you can see the playbook that we developed as part of the exercise creation stage, and something that participants read ahead of time, but also now that you can use it as an internal resource as they're working to implement some of their solutions internally. On the next, I wanted to give an example of by using business services as one of the. So there are a lot of underlying conditions that are already relevant to this business function, and those relate to, for example, inability to do some of the infrastructure or financial modeling based on future conditions. At the moment, they're all based only on historic conditions, so they may not be as adaptable to future climate-related risks. Some of the conditions also relate to employee, for example, health and safety, because FPUC has a lot of outdoor workers. Some of the issues with the state and federal permitting requirements, some of which my colleagues also mentioned before, even cybersecurity or IT threats that the SFPC could be facing, financial instability, and others. And then we tried to think how some of these conditions could be exacerbated by climate drivers. And so something that we found out through the discussion is that the dynamics are going to be so many of these could be impacting several conditions in parallel. And so here you can see just an example of the infrastructure and forecast modeling. It could be both impacted by different climate hazards, but that could be also applicable to any other conditions. What are some of the risks that could stem out of this dynamics? Again, related either to reputational risk or just the ability to provide reliable access to water, given that the population in the Bay Area is increasing and more the companies that are becoming their commercial customers, damage to water infrastructure, to IT infrastructure, some of the new agreements with the insurance, etc., and the list of opportunities that again was co-developed together with participants, and the SFPC received a whole kind of different options, counting almost different solutions that are this business function. Identify next short-term or mid-term steps. And finally, just to pop on I think my final slide, some of the key insights that we learned. That first, the tabletop size approach proved to be really valuable and effective in fostering this decision-making and collaboration among participants, although it actually it's a really good way to engage leadership, but also business function leads in these very complex discussions, and the ability to create this platform for them to talk about these risks, something they're not doing as part of their day-to-day. Some of the key challenges is that a lot of investments, design, and operational decisions are still work data. Also, there are a lot of chronic issues that need to be taken into account as the organizations such as the SFPUC identifies preparedness, adaptation, and resilience planning. Planning horizons also need to cover different timelines, looking even beyond sort of the current strategy that they have in place, but really pushing the envelope. And some of the key innovations that we implemented as part of this project is something I haven't mentioned, but was really key. Project, we looked into various frameworks available out there to make sure that we're learning not only from the SFPUC and underwater, but also from kind of landscape frameworks that other organizations tested or developed. Although we piloted it with SFPUC and Denver Water, it's really applicable to any water utility of any size, any scale, and in any location, and could be potentially even tested in with a non-utility organization. So that was one of our key lessons learned that could be also applicable to New Jersey works as well. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks so much. Okay, so you've heard from all of our panelists, and now we're going to move into the Q&A. If you haven't already, you can add your questions. There's a Q&A tab. We have 2 there, so let's get started with those. The first question is, what is the most critical change that utilities must take in their management approach to effectively address resiliency issues? And as far as who, I'm curious to see if Oleg, based on, and I don't think, I guess, well, and Jim is here as well, based on working with many utilities, what are your options?
So what I have to say is,
and remember everybody to turn their camera on. Sorry.
So, from my standpoint, from my experience, is that now whenever you're undertaking a capital improvement, resiliency is no longer a luxury. There's always, when a project is developed, there's always what's known as a value engineering stage where you cut back on things because you might be a little bit over budget and you want to fit things into the budget. Well, nowadays, especially at New Jersey American, those nice to haves are not nice to haves anymore. You have to build in, extra capacity. You have to build in some freeboard in order to deal with, extreme situations. And these extreme situations are happening more frequently. So to the credit for our leadership's credit, there's a lot less pushback than there used to be with respect to adding extra capacity or adding the ability to deal with extreme circumstances than there used to be. So I think we've learned from these extreme weather events that we've had, and when we sit down to plan capital improvements, we don't we build in that resiliency automatically. It's not a luxury anymore. It's a necessity.
I think Oleg has a really good point. 20 years ago, when some of these things started happening, we said, oh, that was a crazy storm. That couldn't happen again. And I think after what we've experienced more recently, we know it's going to happen again. We have to plan for it. So I think the most critical change, especially for some of my more public oriented clients, is recognizing that resiliency is going to have to be built in. I think the past thought process was that if the plant is built, we just sort of deal with it as best we can. And now it's just so clear to me that we're going to have to protect some of these facilities, and we're going to have to do certain things that maybe 10 or 20 years ago, we'd say that's too expensive.
Yeah, I want to concur. This is Rick. I want to concur. It's really actually after the experience of the last 15, 20 years and what we anticipate, it's irresponsible. And the critical thing for us in public agencies is making sure that our leaders, the people that run our agencies, sit on our boards, and the public, the municipalities and other agencies that we are our constituents, that they understand. I know in our region that has become perfectly clear to everybody, but we have to learn how to communicate and articulate why these expenses and projects need to be implemented. It's irresponsible. We have the public's trust in this sector, whether we're public or a private entity, and they expect us to protect their well-being, their health and safety. And those pictures that have shown earlier are just eye-opening, and we just can't accept that that's what has to happen.
Great, thank you so much. So several of you spoke about the hurdles of permits. The next question is, what are the most important things the New Jersey DEP can do to assist water utilities to both prepare for climate change and to reduce your climate footprint, in addition to streamlining permit process? And we'll talk about, there's more, but we can talk about that next. So any thoughts about next steps with streamlining, what DEP can do to help the utilities?
I have one idea, Jen, if you want me to give it.
Yeah.
I'd like to see a fast track program for
Yeah.
permitting at DEP for these kinds of projects. There is no reason why, I've spoken to people at DEP, they agree. They just don't have the mechanism to do it. But there should be a way that a resiliency project that's going to protect from millions of dollars in damage shouldn't be able to get a fast track permit in a matter of a month or two, rather than being at the bottom of the pile with all the other applications that are coming into land use regulation.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. That's some sort of fast track system for appropriate resiliency projects.
You know what, I'd
So-
like to hear a little bit more. Two people said that it took 2 years. Like, what are the hurdles? Like, what are the points, the pitch points?
Getting the review to
Is
occur.
it just,
Yeah, yes.
okay.
And it depends on where you are. We sort of have another process because we're in the coastal zone and in an environmentally sensitive area, rightfully so.
So, I think you have to look at public works projects differently than you do, a developer's project. It's just, you're talking about two different things. When you're working on a public works project, you're doing it to protect and enhance public, either, health, safety, or the utility process. And, it has to be looked upon a little bit differently than, just a development project. When we were doing the flood wall enhancements that we did, we partnered with New Jersey DEP. We sat down with them. We told them what we were planning. We brought them on site. We literally took them around the perimeter of the facility and described what the project was going to be. We got them on board early so that they knew, what the issue is. We showed them the money shot. We took them to the spot where the money shot was taken, and explained to them, this, when you see something tangible like that, it opens their eyes, and to their benefit, or to their benefit, or to
The credit.
their credit. I'm sorry, I was thinking, my mind was slipping there for a second.
Your brain. Yep, I get it.
Yeah, to their credit, they bought in, completely, and they helped move things along as best as possible. But there are procedures that they have in place, and those procedures take time, and maybe there should be a different way of looking at these type of projects, so that those procedures can be fast tracked. I think they did a really good job, on our, in our experience, for the flood wall, and we actually got some funding through the Environmental Infrastructure Trust Fund, so that helped significantly too. It was a worthwhile project. They understood the importance of it, and they did everything that they could in their power to help work us through it. And even though they were able to do that for us, they still have, certain hurdles that they have to work through. And so I think that's an internal issue that they may have to address. But, from our standpoint, New Jersey American standpoint, they did as much as they could in order to help us. And, we really appreciated it. And, ultimately, it helped, it saved the day. This was a project that was just in time. It was on budget, and when it was tested, we came out victorious. So it was a good story all around.
Great. Okay. The next question is: utilities seem to have learned a lot. Your utilities have learned a lot about addressing the impacts of climate change. How are you sharing these lessons with surrounding municipalities and other utilities?
Well, at the ACUA, we bring our municipalities and literally thousands of citizens and residents of Atlantic County, school children to seniors, college students to elementary school kids. We bring them to the wastewater plant. Not only do we show them how the treatment plant works, we show them the seawall and show them those pictures that I showed earlier, why that's important. We have to educate the people we serve. We make our plant very accessible throughout the year, but in particular, Earth Week, we have a big event where it's basically an open house for everybody to come.
Anyone else? Now let's talk about communication. How should municipalities and utilities communicate the ways that they're planning for climate resilience? And I'm wondering, Hector, if you could answer. You talked about how the lesson learned from your experience was to enhance communications among the different parties in the municipality. But what are ways that you're planning to increase that communication?
Well, one thing that I was kind of already done for the late October storm, and I'm hoping will continue, is really just when the forecast, when we see that there's something coming down the pike, and it's for a big storm is forecasted, that we just touch base, and yes, we're aware of it. We know what's going on. This is what's going. This is the steps that we're taking. Certainly not looking in my position. I don't think any of the members of the governing body have any interest in getting down into the weeds of that particular organization's operations, but I think everyone, but what we do want to know is, yes, the utility company, the utilities are aware of it, and they are preparing just the same that we're preparing. I mean, internally, when whether it be a weather event or what have you, is forecasted. We have our meetings. Normally at this point, it's usually less than 20 minutes. Go around, the emergency services get together. Now, we can do it over a video call, and yes, we're aware of it. This is what we're doing, what have you. So, it doesn't, I don't think we're looking for, a 10-page document, outlining every possible event and what they're going to do in case of it. What really we want to know is that, yes, you're aware of a forecasted weather event, and we are preparing for it.
Yeah, we work with the county emergency management office, and they coordinate some things. But on a day-to-day basis, the 14 municipalities, water, sewer authorities, and agencies that we serve, there's an ongoing dialogue in preparation for a major event that happens at a working level to coordinate pump station management issues, because that's the more normal thing, as opposed to the superstorm Sandy kind of level stuff where everybody's paying attention. It's more these kind of nor'easter events, things that sort of just pop up on you. It's surprising. So we're really attuned to the weather and working with the member agencies.
Great, thank you. So let's talk about funding. So what are the most significant funding challenges when it comes to, building, planning, designing for resilience? And specifically, what are the opportunities for some of these smaller, maybe low resourced utilities?
I think the significant is backup power, probably, for most of the agencies. The cost of implementing that, and the upfront design cost and so forth. I think that's probably the thing that affects most local collection systems at the municipal level.
And is there funding for planning as well as design and construction, or is it challenging to find the planning funding?
Well, the New Jersey Environmental Trust will fund those projects and have. It's really convincing whoever's making the financial decision that it's a priority issue and that it needs to be addressed for something that might happen or may happen or sometime in the future. So the money that comes from the environmental trust is a loan. So there's a commitment on the local level, municipal level, county, regional level. You're assuming more debt or capital cost and adding it to your rate, your charges.
Great. Anybody else have anything else to add about funding? And then the final question is for Oleg. There was a question about the work that you covered. The question was, was there features that had flexibility that allowed for, basically increasing that flood resilience, from the original work that you did to, protecting against larger events?
I'm not quite sure. Could you repeat that again?
The question is, when these hardening solutions were implemented, is there flexibility to protect against larger events? You had funding and approval for one level. Was there flexibility to go to a higher level?
So, I think I alluded to this when I made my presentation, in that we sat down and we spent a lot of time to figure out what that flood elevation should be, what the wall elevation should be, plus some freeboard associated with it for wind effects and things like that. So we built in the flexibility to have a 500-year storm plus a little bit more, because we built in a little bit of a freeboard there for wind effects and wave action on the facility. When after Hurricane Floyd, and when we undertook the upgrade of the Canal Road plant, which is again the sister plant directly across the river at a higher elevation, though, that facility was originally constructed, although its base, its original design capacity was 40 million gallons. We built in the ability to expand that facility. That facility's ultimate build out is going to be over 200 million gallons. The first stage of that project was to go to 100 million gallons. So the piping that was installed in the ground was designed for 100 million gallons. Even though the facility was only rated for 40, the piping in the ground was designed for 100, so that we wouldn't have to dig again. And so, it was, going from a rated capacity of 40 million gallons to 75 million gallons really was not that difficult to do. There were a couple of pinch points that restricted the facility, but really the majority of the facility was designed to allow us to get to 100 million gallons pretty quickly. And so, we were put to the test, and the design was put to the test. And, as I said earlier, thank God that we had that, we had the Canal Road plant online and operating, a couple of years before Hurricane Floyd hit, because that really saved us. It was, I was early on in my operational career, and it was shocking, to see the impact of a storm like that on just what happens when things flood out. I mean, water treatment plants, wastewater treatment plants have a lot of assets that are actually underground, buried deep in chambers and things like that. And so, when you're inundated by a flood, the first step you have to do is you got to pump everything out. And so the first 2 days in the aftermath of Hurricane Floyd is we had every fire department, within a 50-mile radius, bringing their pumper trucks to our facility to pump out the low levels of the facility, just so that we could get down there and assess the damage. So,
Right.
when you design, you have to think about these things, and
Right.
now we do. We see what the worst case scenario
Yeah.
is, and we design for that worst case scenario.
Thank you. Very interesting. I feel like we could have made a whole day session out of this, and I almost feel like we still should. But anyway, I just want to thank everyone for attending our session today, and I hope that the discussion will continue beyond this panel and inform action that's needed to make New Jersey's water systems better, make them able to withstand the various climate impacts. Just to participate in Jersey hunt, check out the question in the chat. And our next section, which is about lead service line replacement, is coming up here at 1 o'clock. So we will see you there. In the meantime, please do check out the sponsors in the lobby or visit the exhibit area. And thank you so much to our panelists and to all of our attendees. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day. Great weekend.
Take care.
Have a great day.